Hey y'all, I'm Dan Hamilton, Marine Corps veteran and host of the Next Gen Warrior Show. As always, the Next Gen Warrior Show is brought to you by Chairman George P. Bush and our dedicated staff at the Texas Veterans Land Board. Every Monday here at the Next Gen Warrior Show, we are proud to advocate for those who are struggling, as well as encourage the leaders who are serving in those communities. Joining me today is one of those leaders, Doug Pfeffer. Doug Pfeffer is the executive director at the Mission Continues, as well as a 24-year Army veteran. Doug, it's great to have you on the program today. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. And yourself?
I'm doing good. I'm excited to have you on the program to talk about the great work, not only that you did as an Army veteran, but what you've learned about community development and really your desire, it seems, to continue to lead and serve after the military. But before we jump into all of that, tell us a little bit about your military career.
I appreciate it. So I did serve in the military for 24 years. I was 4 years in the Navy as a search and rescue swimmer, transferring to the Army in 1994, where I spent the next 20 years as a forward observer and then later on as a field artillery first sergeant, retiring in 2013. It was a fantastic career. I had an opportunity to see some amazing places. Of course, I've had all the standard deployments that you think, Iraq, Afghanistan, and whatnot. But when I retired out of Fort Drum, New York, and I returned then to where my family and I were going to settle down, which was just outside of Seattle, Washington. From there, I sought out opportunities to go ahead and continue to give back to my community. When I was leaving the military, I thought that like every other retiring service member, that I would wind up in government service somewhere, working on a military installation. And I really didn't want to go down that road. And I talked to a very wise Sergeant Major friend of mine who told me that I should take what I really loved about my service in the military and apply that to the private sector. So I really didn't see myself deploying anymore or running 6 miles before breakfast. But what I did like was helping people. And I liked kind of being that go-to source for military families to go ahead and help to get them from point A to point B through whatever struggles they were going through. And that led me to the nonprofit sector. And just like anybody else who's probably never been around the nonprofit sector, the first thing that my wife asked me when I was getting ready to retire is, how do you get a paycheck if it's a nonprofit? And so I had to do a little bit of research into that and see how this all worked out. But I wound up partnering with a woman in just outside of Seattle to start an organization called Rally Point 6, which would wind up being the first one-stop shop resource for veterans in Washington State. Prior to that, veterans would have to go to 5 or 6 different locations to go ahead and get help with employment or housing or education or whatever it may be. Well, we brought it all under one roof. It was a great success in the area. We had a great opportunity to really affect transitioning service members out of Joint Base Lewis McChord in the Northwest. I stayed there for 2.5 years before I took a role as an executive director with an equine therapy facility, helping veterans with post-traumatic stress as well as autistic children. I stayed there for a little bit until an opportunity arose that the Mission Continues, which is a national veteran service organization that helps to empower transitioning veterans through community impact work. And I've been there for the last 5 years. And right now I serve, not necessarily the executive director, but the senior director of Platoon Experience, which is really overseeing operations in about 50 cities around the country right now.
No, that's really incredible. But I have to ask you this, since you started out in the Navy and then you spent the rest of your time in the Army, when Army-Navy game comes around, who do you root for?
Well, it's funny. I guess I could go either way, right? And I remember there was a time.
You never lose, I guess, huh?
Yeah. I mean, I remember a time when West Point went winless for 4 years straight. So it's tough, but these days I'll go ahead and root for Army. I spent the longest time in the Army, so I think I wind up rooting for Army. So
yeah, fair enough. Well, I appreciate you, kind of setting the framework for your time after you got out of the military, because I think it's important for veterans who maybe have just served 4 years not as long as you did, that even senior enlisted leaders like yourself, or maybe even officers, have come to a similar crossroads in what they want to do after the military. And certainly your desire to be in the nonprofit sector, it seemed to continue to build on the desire that you had to serve your community. And what you have done really well is bring people together around a common mission. So if you can take me back to Washington, where you're trying to get these services all together, you're trying to communicate this to people who may not have this thought process before, and get them all on the same page. Tell us about that process and what you learned through it.
Yeah, so when I left the military, I think that one of the things that people take for granted for when they leave the military is the ability to build teams. And I think that we don't really do a good job sometimes of really kind of drawing our attention to that skill set that service members bring when they leave the military. You know, we do it in the military unconsciously, where we're building teams for whether it be deployments or training or whatever it may be, and we do it very quickly and efficiently, and we're able to bring together different elements to go ahead and focus on the common fight. And I think that's kind of the mentality that I brought to building out that nonprofit piece when I left the military. We had all these different entities that were not used to working together, but to go ahead and bring them onto the same page with the common, the common element of really serving the veteran and putting the veteran first, really kind of seized the day for us. Because I think prior to that, some of these organizations were really focused on what was in it for them, and how they could go ahead and further their cause. But what I always tried to bring was, let's talk about that common stakeholder, which is the veteran, and let's put the veteran first, and then the success of the organizations around us will come because we'll all work together. So it was really a case of building that team from the beginning. I would really work hard to kind of make sure that we were kind of satisfying all the needs of the organizations that would work with us, while still able to go ahead and come together to serve the veteran.
Yeah, was this an idea though? Like when you were in the military, did you already have, you talked about, hey, I wasn't sure if I wanted to go into the nonprofit sector, but I'm always interested in kind of the mental discussion that you had maybe with yourself about who am I going to be after the military. Was this idea to serve in the veterans community, was it already something that maybe had like popped into your head 4 or 5 years earlier and then you took action on it? Or was it something that only started to become aware to you after you had gotten out of the military and were a veteran and were using the services, and maybe seeing maybe the lack of, as you talked about, different organizations working together to serve the stakeholder?
Yeah, sure. So again, I retired in 2013, but I'd say at about 2010, 2011, somewhere in there, when I had my last change of duty station, which was to go to Fort Drum, I started really thinking about retirement and what I was going to do afterwards. And I would talk to several people about opportunities that were available after the military. And of course, at the time, everybody sort of steers you towards government service work or something like that. And the only answers that I was really getting was, well, you could always apply for a government job, or don't worry about it. You have plenty of skill sets. Something will just materialize, or something will just happen. And the closer that I would get to retirement, and at the time, we didn't really have a very good transition program in the military. And I would challenge to say that this still needs a lot of work. But at the time, they would not really do very much to prepare you for the transition to the private sector. And I think that particularly senior leaders, when they leave the military, are not really given very much time to prepare themselves professionally as well as personally when they leave. Often they're working right up until the day that they retire or they leave the service, and all of a sudden they're out and they really don't know what happens next. And I recognize the fact that there just wasn't a lot of resources available to transitioning service members to help them with resume preparation, also just how to go through an interview or how to look for a job. Someone like myself who spent 24 years in, I think the last job I looked for before the military was probably working in a fast food place in college. It wasn't the kind of thing that people really worked very hard to prepare me for. So noticing that, I started to kind of look around at what was available. And what I found was that it was a sea of misinformation and websites and phone numbers. And I could spend days trying to just get a hold of a human being to go ahead and help me with something. And I thought that there was a lot out there, but it wasn't very organized. So that was kind of where I started to get this idea of how can I kind of be an agent for change for that? How can I go ahead and help veterans that come after me have a little bit of an easier time when they transition? I would talk to my fellow veterans who were transitioning from the military, and all of them were just as confused as I was. So when I was able to transfer into the nonprofit sector, I really kind of made it my mission to work with transitioning veterans to not only put resources and tools in their hands, but also to to mentor and teach them and show them and really be a calming voice on the other side of the curtain. Because I remember when I left the military, there was nobody waiting for me on the other side to tell me how expensive dental care was, or what to expect when it came to going back to wherever you retire, wherever you go. So it was really born out of the not only the frustrations but also the desire to really be one to help when I left the service.
Yeah. So I want to pivot a little bit towards the mission continues, and you guys do an incredible amount of work, and something that we um, always emphasize here is the continued service and leadership after the military is something that, especially with community, which is what you all do so well, is you build the community, then you get the community to continue to lead and serve in their community. And I think that is so critical for veterans to take part of. But last year, when in 2020, there, in March, about this time last year, things changed and people stayed at home. Your mission must have changed. And I was wondering if you could kind of take me through your thought process and how you pivot the organization in a different environment.
Sure. So it really is a case of, it comes down to what we want to do is we want to empower veterans, through community impact work. And I think that prior to the pandemic, we were doing this quite a bit in communities all over the country. And as you stated, the mission continues is a great sort of example of a spot where veterans who want to continue to serve could go ahead and land. And I think that we're an all volunteer force right now. Everybody joins the military these days because they really have this desire to serve. And it's not necessarily serving in a government capacity or a nonprofit capacity, but just to serve, to have a greater impact. And I think the veterans, when they leave the service, they wind up either, in corporate America, or maybe they're making widgets for 40 hours a week. And they don't want to, it's not as impactful as when they were in the service.
Yeah.
So the mission continues, gives them an opportunity to continue to have that impact. And we were having an amazing impact in communities. Some of our events would host 200, 300, 400 people at one time. And it was amazing the transformation that we could do in a community. And we wouldn't just go in quickly with a one-shot deal, take a bunch of photographs and then head out the door, but rather stay for a sustained effort in community. And I think that's born really from, military operations, where you're going in and you're really wanting to make a difference in these communities. You don't want to just come in really quickly and then leave. But you want to come in and have a lasting impact, and you want the local population to feel like they trust you and to feel like that impact is genuine. So we would continue to do that. Now, during the pandemic, of course, there was a tremendous shift. And like everybody else, we were just as caught off guard as every other person in America. So we kind of sat down for a second and thought, okay, how can we go ahead and continue to make an impact in these communities? What was important in January of 2020 is not as important anymore in April of 2020. People did, efforts change. All of a sudden, lots of the population are facing unemployment. Lots of the population are facing financial difficulty. There's concerns about, am I going to have a job in 6 months from now? And that breeds food insecurity. So now you're worried about groceries. You're worried about where that's going to come from. Sometimes you can't even get to the grocery store anymore because it's too complicated. Maybe you're suffering from COVID. So we saw food insecurity as a way that we could directly impact the communities that we were in. Prior to the pandemic, not every community was in need of food insecurity initiatives. But during the pandemic, it was a common denominator across the board, where whether we were in Los Angeles, Houston, Miami, New York, DC, it didn't matter. Everywhere people were worried about food insecurity. We're worried about where their next meals were going to come from. So we were able to take uh, the population, take our blue shirts around the country, and then pivot their focus onto food insecurity. But it also meant that we didn't necessarily have to be in 2, 3, 400-person projects anymore. We could be in smaller groups that were COVID safe, go out to food banks, help to distribute food, help to reallocate food, help to collect food in areas, all the while maintaining the safety precautions that were put in place due to COVID-19. And it also meant that regardless of whether we were in Seattle or Pittsburgh, where it might be different,
Yeah.
we could then adjust and tailor our efforts based on the communities that we were in, all the while focusing on the same mission of addressing food insecurity.
Yeah, that's a really incredible story, because I think, last year certainly will be a case study for generations about adapting and how to pivot in a difficult time. And I think it's really incredible that you were able to message that and then activate all of your local leaders. For those who may be unfamiliar with the Mission Continues, can you talk about what they're doing in these different cities, and what you all had done prior to 2020 to keep veterans serving within their community?
Yeah, so if you look at different communities, I guess I could start prior to 2020. Mission Continue started out as a program that really helped to offer veterans opportunities to serve fellowships with the nonprofits for a set period of time. And I actually came into contact with the Mission Continues back when I was starting Rally Point 6, because at Rally Point 6, because we were a startup nonprofit, we really didn't have a lot of resources, capital to go ahead and hire a bunch of staff. But we were able to turn to the Mission Continues to work with some of their fellows. Well, later on, as we kind of fast forward a little bit to roughly around 2015, 2014, they began to put forth the concept of the platoon concept, which was to take a group of individuals, a chapter, if you will, we call them platoons, and put them in communities around the country. Some cities have multiple platoons. Some cities have one platoon. It depends on the size of the city and the demographics of those cities. But each platoon would then focus on one particular operation and would stay in a community for a long period of time and have a sustained focus. So to give you an example, where I was located at the time, which was Seattle, Washington, we had a platoon working in Rainier Beach, which is an under-resourced community on the south side of Seattle. And we would start work in the Rainier Beach High School, helping to kind of renovate the high school and kind of focus on educational programs and stuff in the development of the youth in the area. But once the work was done at Rainier Beach High School, we could then lift and shift our focus to parks and safe trails in the area. Then we could shift to the Ethiopian Community Center, the Somali Community Center, and different areas, so that the entire community of Rainier Beach could feel like it wasn't just us coming in, doing 1 or 2 projects and smiling for cameras and then moving on, but rather we were a sustained focus over a long period of time, to the point where several years later, I was at a block party on the south side of Seattle, and I had an individual run up to me who was graduating from Rainier Beach High School, who had remembered when we had done work in their gymnasium 3 years prior, and it had encouraged him to get back in the gym and lift weights, to get back on the football team. And now he had a partial scholarship to go to college. And you think, is the work that I'm doing in painting a weightlifting room really going to make a difference 2, 3 years down the road? But it does, because people see that people care about their community and care about the area that they're in. And then it makes them want to take a focus, and it wants them to show that and return that. And this individual wound up going on to college. So, that was what we were focused on for a long time. And then of course, 2020, the pandemic, and we have to shift to a food insecurity. But all over the country, again, the restrictions were different. So we have some platoons that are operating sort of in some really tight conditions. Los Angeles is a community in Southern California that has a great deal of restrictions based on COVID. They have a lot of hot spots and they are very, very careful. But we were able to identify where we can make a difference there, where we can set up a collection point for food in Compton and be able to set up a weekly collection point to be able to collect food and redistribute amongst the population. But that looks different in different areas, right? If you're in St. Louis, it looks different. New York looks different. Houston. But we were again able to work with local leaders to determine what those boundaries were, what those left and right limits were of the precautions for COVID, work around that, provide the proper safety protocols ourselves at our projects where we were taking temperatures, making sure that nobody was sick, providing masks and social distancing, so that not only were we able to still focus on our mission of food insecurity, but we were able to present a safe environment to encourage volunteers to come out, which a lot of places didn't pivot very quickly for that either. So I think it's a real testament not only to the organization and its ability to make a shift like that, but also to the flexibility of our volunteer leaders on the ground and how they took really an unprecedented event and just were able to power through it and continue the mission on the other side. And that really is a testament to what sets veterans apart from a typical citizen in the private sector, is that veterans don't really, they hit walls, they just go through them. They figure out a way around them. They go under them. They go over them. Nothing's going to stand in the way of us, you know?
And is that what you think has made the model that you all have so successful? You talk about the platoons, right, of getting veterans together, but you're also doing a couple of different, you're almost tackling a couple of different things within that. Maybe if not directly, you're tackling them indirectly, which is bridging the military civilian divide. But the key to that, right, is that the veteran is willing to come back to his or her community and be involved and find those bridges and connect with their communities in ways that they maybe could not while they were serving.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, when I was in the military, and I told you I retired out of Fort Drum, New York, I went back to Seattle, Washington. But I'm not originally from Seattle, Washington. I mean, so it'll never really be my community, my hometown, right? My kids, to them, it's their hometown. So they went to high school there, they went to school, so they have school age friends. But I think veterans in general, they look for two things when they leave the service. One, they want to stay connected to their tribe, their community. They want to stay connected to other veterans. It's that shared understanding, that shared empathy, that shared kind of feeling of, you know, I've been to Afghanistan. Have you been to Afghanistan? That means that we now share this bond that others don't really understand. But we also long to be a part of our own community around us because we really haven't had an opportunity for that for the years that we served in the military. Maybe we bounced around a little bit. And even if you spend a long time in one place, you're not really part of the fabric of that community. You're part of the outlying fabric of the military community around it. So I think all veterans are looking for those two things when they leave. They want to stay connected to their veteran community, but they also want to be able to make the transition to become part of the community that they live in. And organizations like the Mission Continues give veterans opportunities to be able to instantly impact the community around them while still being connected to their tribe.
Yeah. No, I love hearing that. And I want to ask you about this, though. In all the ups and downs and the unexpected events of 2020, what's kept you inspired?
I'm going to say it's probably three things. One, you know, when I look at the veteran volunteer leaders that we have, these are individuals who have full-time jobs, are tackling their own issues around COVID-19. They're dealing themselves with their own insecurity and what they're facing, but they still go to work for the Mission Continues. They still host events. They still do this every month in and month out. And every time I see them, it's inspiring to see these individuals that are doing it really because they just want to make a difference in the communities that they call home. So it's really, really inspiring to see that. And we have a great staff too. I mean, the other thing is my staff, right? Because we have individuals that are really dedicated to this, and we're a very decentralized organization. So it's not like we go to an office every day and we're able to kind of, you know, hang around a water cooler, go to lunch together. This is something where we really rely on each other because we're all spread out across the country. But we have this incredibly dedicated staff that we have. And the other thing that's really keeps me going is really seeing our community and how much they still need us. Because I know when I left the service, after many, many years of service, the one thing that I was concerned about and worried about was, am I going to be well accepted in the community as a veteran? You know, my father was in the military, Vietnam era, and he would talk about how it was difficult for him when he transitioned from the military, and how he never really felt like he was fully accepted by the community and whatnot. And I was concerned about that. I was concerned. But when I see the way these communities open their arms to veterans and look to veterans to go ahead and help with the healing of the communities and make a difference in those communities, that's some truly inspirational stuff. So.
Yeah, no, it certainly is something that hits home for me too, because when I came back from the service, the community, right, that really accepted me, and I can remember this like it was, like it was yesterday, was a Student Veterans Association at UT, and I've talked about this on the show before. But the second thing that I noticed after being, like you talked about, within the tribe, because you guys do such a good job of setting up the tribe of military veterans where you feel like you're at home. And then that puts them in the community that's telling them, hey, we still want you to be involved here. We want you to continue to lead. We want you to continue to serve. And pardon me, that happened for me here in Austin. And it was really incredible. It took me a while to understand the importance that service is not going to be putting on a flak jacket and a Kevlar anymore. It's not going to be going down range with my buddies. It is going to look different. But once I understood how important that was to the people in my community, to the people in my neighborhood, then I started to take responsibility for the people in my community. And that was certainly something that I think you guys do really well. But what I want to ask you about that is having a decentralized organization like you do. What are maybe some lessons that you have learned about instilling culture in that sense of camaraderie, in that sense of tribe, in that sense of responsibility for those veterans when they come back home, that like, hey, your community wants you. These are the people that you should do it with, and we are going to help you get adapted back into your communities. How do you message that when you are so decentralized?
Well, part of it is a heavy dose of transparency and support with the veterans that we work with around the country. And we want to make sure that they feel supported. You know, we're asking them to go out and make a difference in their community, and we're asking them to go out and participate in these events and these projects and these builds, or food insecurity or food distribution. But if we're not supporting them very well, or we're not staying in touch with them or staying in contact with them, then they're gonna sort of lose faith, or they're gonna lose that connectivity. So we've learned some lessons out of that. Prior to the pandemic, we had several opportunities where we could bring people together for large scale events or whatnot, that they really felt that connection. But of course, throughout the pandemic, we've not been able to do that. So what we've done instead is we've replaced it with sort of these monthly large scale Zoom calls where we could go ahead and be very transparent about what's going on with the organization, and answer any questions that they might have. If we've traveled when we could, I just recently returned from Atlanta, where I was able to participate in a great project on the west side of Atlanta, where we're passing out cold weather clothing to the homeless community out there. So, really being able to stay connected that way has really done good things. And it's also providing them with the resources that they need to go ahead and get the job done. I think that veterans prove time in and time out that they don't need a lot, but what they do need is that purpose, that motivation, and that direction. And if you can give them those three things, and they understand why they're doing it and what they need to do, and you give them that good direction, good resources, right, and you just keep them motivated, then they're going to go out there and they're going to continue to do great things. And we want to recognize our veterans for that. So I think that we were able to provide those things and help them and really kind of support them. they continue to do great things every day.
Yeah, and you guys also have some personal and professional development programs. And I was wondering if you could speak to these real quick. You have the Service Leadership Corps, you have the Women Veterans Leadership Program, and then you have the mass deployments. Can you maybe just talk briefly about each one of those and the importance of those programs to the mission continues?
Sure. So the three of them, first of all, are key to the development of veterans that work with us. And I'll kind of give you a little brief history of where each one of them came. I can go ahead and start with the mass deployment program. So this program has only been around for about 4 years, but once a year, we typically, in a non-pandemic year, would bring together about 100 veterans from around the country to one particular city for 5 days straight of very intense service projects. So we've done it in cities like Houston, Los Angeles, Atlanta, Baltimore, cities like that. And what we've been able to accomplish is to really kind of bring them together. We usually house them in one of the university's dorms because it's during the summertime, so the university dorms are open. And one of the ones that was really great was the one in Los Angeles, where we were on the South Central Los Angeles. We stayed at the USC campus, and we were able to work in these communities and come back day in and day out and really kind of activate veterans, not only locally in Los Angeles, but bring about 100 veterans from around the country. It's been tremendously successful. It's well received. Of course, during a pandemic year, we can't do it, which has been frustrating, but we will definitely be returning to that. The Women's Veteran Leadership Program was born out of what we used to host, which was the Women's Veteran Leadership Summit. And what we've found is that women make up roughly about 51% of our membership, which they only make up about, I think it's maybe 12%, 13% of the armed forces at this point. But we have a tremendous amount of women in our ranks. And, why is that? Probably because women truly feel empowered when they come to our ranks. Yep. We want to go ahead and provide the same opportunities for them as we do for our male volunteers. They're out there doing amazing things in the community. We give them this, everything is exactly the same, and we treat people very, very much equally. So we had a Women's Veteran Leadership Summit where we're bringing really strong, empowered women from around the country together to speak over a course of one weekend to some of our women veterans. And it was such an incredibly positive experience that it grew into an entire program. Wow. Where now we're doing leadership development for women during a course of several months. Typically in a non-pandemic year, we would bring them together several times during that time, but now we're in a virtual environment. And the last one you mentioned was our Service Leadership Corps program. And this is really the cornerstone of what develops our platoon leaders that are doing things in the community. We bring them together for a 6-month period where during that course of that 6 months, we'll bring them together for 3 in-person events, but they have a lot of work that's done between those in-person events. They break up into smaller teams. They have a lot of leadership development from that. So there's a lot of professional and personal development that comes out of that. And then at the conclusion of their time with the Service Leadership Corps, when they graduate, they then go ahead and move into a platoon leadership role in their community for the course of the next year. So if you think about it, it's a 6-month program to go ahead and go through the Service Leadership Corps, and then they'll serve a year as a platoon leader. That's an 18-month process, really, that you're working with this individual to go ahead and move the needle in under-resourced communities. Prior to their time at the Service Leadership Corps, they were likely already a volunteer with a platoon in a community somewhere. So you could very well have this person within your folds to mentor for 2 years to really, and at the conclusion, the transformation is incredible. I could tell you stories. I have one individual who started out working as a volunteer with us. He was a homeless veteran living in a shelter. And by the time that he was done with his platoon leader time, he'd had his own place. He turned his life around. He had a job, and he was moving in a great direction. So we see this story kind of repeated often, where it's about giving them an opportunity and giving them a chance to excel and showing them that you want to continue to invest in veterans even after their time in the service.
No, I'm so glad you brought that up. It's encouraging to hear about that, because those are certainly the stories that I hope veterans, even if they are struggling, like you talked about, if they find themselves in a situation after the service where they go, man, I should be doing more than what I'm doing, or my life didn't get off to the right track after the service. There are organizations like the Mission Continues who want to see you succeed, and we want to encourage those veterans to reach out to the resources and the people in their community, because it's really critical to make sure that they continue to lead and serve, and they're the best individuals in their community to do it because of their military training and their military leadership. Doug, I want to end it here with this. I appreciate you setting the example for servant leadership, as well as providing an opportunity for veterans to join these platoons, to be a part of their community, as well as find their veteran tribe. Is there anything that we didn't get to talk to or talk about today that you would like to leave our audience with?
Oh, yeah, sure. So the mission continues. I don't want everybody to think that it's only for veterans. It's for the community at large too. It's for everybody to go ahead and come out. If you're looking for an opportunity even to just serve alongside veterans, then the mission continues is for you. It's not just solely for veterans. As a matter of fact, it was a great thing for me to be able to involve at the time. When I first started at the Mission Continues, I involved my 14-year-old son, who arguably at 14 years old, they could certainly use a good dosage of serving their community. Well, now he's 19 and he's at the University of Tennessee, where he himself is doing volunteer efforts in the community, and he attributes that being instilled in him through organizations like the Mission Continues. So if you're a veteran or a community member, or you just want to go ahead and serve alongside veterans and make a difference in your community, check us out at missioncontinues.org, and we'd love to have you in a blue shirt.
Well, Doug, thank you so much for coming on the program today, and thank you for all of the work that you do, as well as your team at the Mission Continues.
Thanks, appreciate it.
Absolutely. On behalf of Chairman George P. Bush and our staff at the Texas Veterans Land Board, we will see you here back next Monday. Have a good one.
Follow us on Instagram at Voices of Vets, on Twitter at Voice of Veterans, and on Facebook at facebook.com/Voices of Veterans. To hear more, please visit voicesofveterans.org. Join us in sharing the success stories of Texas veterans. Thank you for joining us for the Next Gen Warrior Podcast.